Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Thriving Thoughts. And I'm your host, Dr. Sherri. It's so great to have all of you who follow, listen, share, like, subscribe, and write us amazing reviews. I'm blown away by some of the reviews, so thank you for that. Hey, listen, the music that you're listening to in the background is by my friend Derek Kuretzer. You can check him out through the links in the show notes. So my guest today, Katie Jordan, had an aha moment when somebody asked her if she was happy. And her answer kind of struck a chord in her and caused her to evaluate and change her life. Her answer was this: well, I'm not unhappy. Y'all are going to love my conversation with Katie. We talk about all things like motherhood and work and friendships and womanhood and being in relationships and achieving and politics, y'all. Yeah, I know. It's like a taboo subject, right? We're not supposed to talk about it. Well, Katie was in that world for several years, that cutthroat world, and she has some serious insights to offer us into what happens in the mind of a woman who desires nothing but achievement, to check off the boxes, and to ultimately be happy. But she had to be confronted with what that looked like for her. So, hey, friends, lean in, enjoy my conversation, be encouraged with my friend, Katie Jordan. Good morning, Katie Jordan. Thank you for joining me for the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
I'm so excited to chat with you too. Hey, I'm curious. I'm looking at I guess you're in your office right now.
Yes. Oh,
so what is
there's
that?
a lot happening.
There is a lot happening, and I love that about you. What is there's like a pink square with a circle. What does that say?
It says Think Pink.
Okay.
And having been involved in a lot of women's activities over the years, it's actually a sign from Victoria's Secret, from a store that closed down.
Okay.
But we talk a lot about being in the pink bubble.
Okay.
And that's basically being in a positive environment, sort of surrounding yourself with people who elevate you.
Oh, yeah.
So several of the organizations I've been part of, their color has been pink. And so it just sort of reminds me to stay in that mindset.
Yeah. And I love the fact that, like, to me, pink is both, it's both pretty and power. Like, it's all of that wrapped up into one. So I cannot wait to dive in, because I can already sense that you have so much to offer the women listening, and that you have clearly had a heart for women. You and I met through a group that you invited me to speak at, which, thank you for doing that. That was really powerful for me to share with the women there. And I think that was Polka Dot Powerhouse. So that's how you and I connected. And you are the president of the Winchester chapter?
Managing director is the official title.
Okay.
Because it's an international women's organization, and there are chapters throughout North America.
Okay.
And so I run two of the chapters in Virginia.
Oh, which other one do you run?
And Woodbridge.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so you guys meet like once a month or so?
We meet a couple times a month for sometimes dinner, sometimes lunch.
Yeah.
And we bring together women. Traditionally, it's business women, but we actually have a lot of women who are involved in nonprofits, or just women who want to be surrounded by others who uplift them. Mm-hmm. And the whole premise is that when you get together with women and connect on both a personal and professional level, you can create stronger business relationships with them. But we create a lot of friendships.
Yeah. And I loved that. I loved the dynamics of the group, and just how the women shared personal details about themselves. There was a lot of talk about kids and spouses and dogs and just life events and stuff like that. So that was really, it was a genuine group. So thanks for having me as a part of that.
Yeah, I appreciate you being there and sharing your wisdom.
Yeah. So tell me, have you always been involved with efforts to uplift and connect women?
Well, when I was in college, a friend of mine joined Mary Kay. And it was really not something on my radar. I actually didn't know about Mary Kay, which is weird because it's been around since the 60s, which is well before.
Has it really?
Yeah. And
I didn't realize it's been around that long. Wow.
And she invited me to come to these events over and over and over again. And finally I went, and it was all about uplifting women and figuring out kind of how to encourage each other and praise each other to success.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much a competition as it was just encouraging others. And she wanted me to do it with her. And I ended up joining back then. That it really wasn't my intention to turn it into a career, although 13 years later, I'm still in Mary Kay.
Okay.
I really just did it to be around these women.
Yeah.
And it sort of sustained me through many career changes and having these women that sort of have your back all the
Yeah.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, you know what, Katie, can you touch on that just a second? Because I think that there are, just in my own experience, there's a lot of women who, I've learned who to surround myself, the women to surround myself with that will have my back. And I also know there's a lot of women who feel like they've just never been able to find that in fact, I was just talking with somebody the other day that was betrayed by her best friend in a big, 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 big way.
oh,
And
yeah.
and that just can leave us, if we're not careful, I guess, feeling bitter and resentful and kind of shutting ourselves down to those opportunities. So can you speak to those women a little bit?
Sure. I mean, and for background, my educational and professional background was in politics. I had always wanted to be in the political world, growing up in the suburbs of DC and
Okay.
watching The West Wing growing up and all of that. And that's what I did. I mean, I worked right out of college for a presidential candidate who happened to be a senator at the time. And
Okay.
through college,
Wow.
I had internships at the White House and the House and the British Parliament.
Oh my
And,
goodness.
and I loved that. But what I realized very quickly is that that world is also very cutthroat. And people oftentimes are idealistic when they enter in and don't realize that some of the reality is that there's a scarcity mentality and there's only so many jobs and so many availabilities out there. So if I can hold you back, then I can get ahead. And it's not a healthy environment sometimes.
Wow. Sure.
And so I sort of had stuck around with these women I had met in Mary Kay, recognizing that if I could surround myself with people who thought about elevating each other instead of tearing you down, that I could plug into that whenever I needed it in my professional life.
Okay.
And
so you found another outlet for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that it's available in many ways, but it's hard because at some point you have to grow, right? You have to choose to grow in your life. And sometimes people are unhappy that you've made that choice.
Yeah.
So
true.
They feel like you're leaving them behind, or it highlights that they have chosen not to push forward.
Right.
And so, have you ever heard the analogy with blue crabs? How you can actually steam blue crabs without the lid on the pot? Because if you pour all of these living crabs into the giant pot, some of them will try to escape, but they won't escape because the ones at the bottom will see the ones who are reaching out and they will grab them and pull them back down into the pot.
No way.
They'll say, too bad, you're staying with us.
Oh, is that legit? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And
that's cutthroat.
It is. And that's a mentality that a lot of people have. They may not recognize that that's what they're doing, but oftentimes when you're striving for something bigger, the people around you will end up saying snide remarks, or they'll say things to kind of cut you down in order to keep you in the place that you're at. And
it creates discomfort. Like when you're basically stirring the pot when you're changing up the game. And so it creates discomfort. And when there's discomfort, people that's our makeup. We don't like that. We like to come back to the equilibrium.
Right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's hard to find the people who genuinely want you to push forward.
Sure.
And so sometimes you have to jump groups, and that's not to say just ditch people you were with before.
Sure.
But when you find people who want to help you elevate yourself and they want to bring you with them when they are reaching for higher ground, then you know you've really found a good group. And
Yeah.
I've always been taught that you're the average of the 5 people you hang around most. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're the smartest in your group or the wealthiest or whatever, then you're in the wrong group because
You're not going to grow. Right.
you need to have people who
Right.
are going to continue to push you
Yeah.
higher.
So how did you handle being in the cutthroat world of politics? I mean, I know that you're saying that for yourself. You
Right.
also found another outlet. You kind of didn't necessarily jump groups, but you know, got 2 different cars at the same time. So how did you navigate that?
I think that a lot of it is recognizing what's happening because sometimes people take everything personally
Mm-hmm.
and most things are not
Right.
personal.
Most things are not. That's right.
You know, most times people aren't necessarily thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves at
Yes.
the time. And politics is an interesting beast in general. I found that there were different offices. Sometimes it was all about who you knew, and sometimes it was about what you knew, and sort of had
Okay.
to figure out what lane you were in
Mm-hmm.
on there. Um, but I recognized very quickly that I could really only compete with myself
Mm-hmm.
in order to have an accurate comparison. Because if I was in
Okay.
an office that was based on who I knew,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't really change who I knew,
Sure.
right? And so I would get very frustrated if I'm just trying to say, well, so and so leapt ahead
Mm-hmm.
because her dad is somebody,
So and so,
right?
right?
Um, I have no control over that. And that's
Yeah.
pretty crippling if you're basing your worth on something that you can't control.
Beautiful, beautiful truth. Yes. Do not base your worth on something you can't control, which by and large is other people's behavior, decisions, actions, thoughts, words, whatever. And
Right.
that's where we end up evaluating our worth from. Thank you. That's beautiful. Say that one more time because I'm going to write it down.
Oh, now you're gonna have to make me remember what I said exactly.
Don't evaluate. Um, don't evaluate your worth
Yeah, you can't determine
on
your
things you
worth
can't control.
based on
That's
the
right.
things you can't control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I
So,
had to
hey,
find small wins,
yeah.
basically,
Mm-hmm.
on things that I could say, oh, look how far I've come, look what I did.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So why politics? I mean, because I'm sure. So, okay, from the outsider's perspective, I believe like, you know, people are historically divided on issues of policy, period. I mean, historically. Um, and, and we have this tendency from the outside to think like, well, you know, if I was in there, then, you know, this is what I would do. This makes sense. This is, you know, and I've always said to people, look, I believe that every person, and I do believe this, although maybe there's like 1 or 2 who are actual sociopaths and they never had this intention, but I believe that most people go into politics with a legitimate concern and desire to serve and to change and impact the world. Like that's what I believe. And I believe that they get in there and they quickly have to learn new rules of the game that are cutthroat, that compromise the integrity with which they first entered office. So,
Sure.
from an insider's perspective, is that an accurate perception?
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean, I definitely came into it from a wanting to create a legacy, create an impact
Mm,
perspective, and that this seemed like the most obvious and largest scale that I could do it at.
yeah.
And I had, since I was little, always said I was going to be the president of the
Okay.
United States. So
Yes, I love
uh,
it.
nobody had ever accused me of thinking small at the time. But my favorite president is a president that most people don't had never even heard of before. But my favorite
Okay.
president is James K. Polk.
Oh, girl.
And
Okay. Tell us about
so,
James K. Polk.
so the reason that I love him It's so random. It's because he actually didn't intend to be president. He was a dark horse candidate. He kind of came out of nowhere. He ran against Henry Clay, who was
Okay.
very well known back then. Um, I mean, Henry Clay's campaign slogan was literally "Who is James K. Polk?" Because he was nobody. I mean, he was nobody. But I mean, which if you can imagine. But so what I loved about him is he said, "These are the things that I think need to be changed in America," and they were major things. He
Okay.
thought we needed to annex Texas. He wanted us to settle the 49th parallel because we had a lot of conflict with where our border was in the
Uh-huh.
north.
Uh-huh.
He wanted us to expand the United States to reach the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
He wanted to fix the tariff issues. I mean, they were major,
Yeah.
major issues. And he said, "This is what I'm going to do." And people got behind him. They said, "This is a major vision. We appreciate it." And he actually accomplished every single one of the things that he sought out to do in 4 years, which is outrageous, first of all.
Unheard of. Right. Yeah.
I mean, he basically got us the western half of the United States.
Wow.
He went through the Mexican American War. I mean, all sorts of things. But the point is, he finished all of those things in
He did
four
what he
years.
said.
He
Yeah.
did what he said. And then when it came time for reelection, he said, "I'm not running for reelection. I've already accomplished the entire vision. It's time for
Wow.
somebody else to put their vision to the test. It's
Oh, wow.
my turn's over, pass it on." And nobody is like that in life
No. No.
anymore, it seems.
Nobody
You
wants
know?
to pass the torch. No, we want to live
No.
forever and we want to reign forever. Yeah.
And I just thought it was the most noble thing
Very.
to say, wow, I could easily be reelected. Nobody accomplishes this much
Right.
in this a little bit of time. But he had done what he said, and it was time to move on. And
Wow.
so just growing up, I always wanted to experience those kinds of
Okay.
impacts in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I worked on the Hill, there were really great highs, but there were a lot of little things that you don't think about. Like people pour their soul into legislation that
Mm-hmm.
never leaves committee,
Yeah.
or just they have to
Right.
resubmit Congress after Congress, and it can kind of be very burdensome just to say, "Gosh, like why are we not moving forward? Like
Right.
what is with the red tape?"
And why am I even doing this? I had a little taste of that disenfranchisement that's how I experienced it. When I was in grad school, I did a rotation in a county jail in Brevard County, Florida. And I had all of these ideas because that's, what I do, like ideas to change the world in my own little corner, wherever I find myself to be. And I was working with the juveniles who were charged as adults. And
Mm.
I was just thinking, man, there's so much more we could be doing for them, that this does not have to be their life. This does not have to be when they turn 18, they go into general population and there they stay until, 30 years later. And so I remember the sergeant at the jail said, "Okay, go ahead, get all your ideas together, give me a proposal, whatever." So I poured my heart into that. Speaking of pouring your heart into something. And I mean, I did, it wasn't all just fluff, but I presented it in a very, very pristine and thoughtful format from beginning to end of these kinds of ideas that I had that we could implement that cost very little money, that would actually lead to rehabilitation and not recidivism, based on research and some different things that I had done. And the sergeant took one look at it, Katie. He like opened it in front of me. He just opened it and he's like, "Yeah, I'm glad you have a heart for that, but that's not how the system works." And I was so deflated. Now I didn't stop, but I just knew that wasn't a corner that I could change.
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem, is that people get discouraged,
Yeah.
and a lot of people who have great ideas refuse to participate in the process because
Right.
of all of the obstacles. And
Right.
so then we lose out on
Yeah.
the vision of so many people,
Yeah. Sure.
and I was actually at a event locally with one of the Virginia senators had come, and someone brought up that specific recidivism issue. And so I'm going to connect you with somebody if
Oh,
you can
awesome.
give your ideas
Yeah. Well, it's really
about
kind
it.
of cool because I have a passion. Let me just share really quickly this story. So I love people, Katie. Like, I see the value in every single person. And when I say every single person, I mean every single person, even those who society deems deplorable or the worst or whatever. And so at the time that I was doing that rotation, people would write in, the inmates would write into the mental health department and they would say, I want to see somebody or whatever. And the wait period was quite long. As you can imagine, we had about 1,800 inmates, and they sometimes had to wait a month, 2 months to see somebody. There were actually 5 of us on staff, which was huge for a county jail. But this one gentleman, I didn't make it out to see him, and I don't know, it was a couple months. And when I went out to his unit, his block to see him, I sat down across from him. And now I was new. I was so green. I was in grad school. I think it was like my first or second year of grad school. But I said, okay. I said, so, what's up? What do you want to talk about today? And he just said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I said, well, it does matter. I said, you wrote in, you wanted to talk. I'm here. You've got my time. Let's talk. And it took some cajoling. And eventually he just broke down crying. And he was like, it doesn't matter because I just found out that the person that I hit, he had a DUI. He was in for a DUI, which I did not know because I never allowed myself to look up their infraction prior to going to see them because I didn't want to prejudge or have a characterization in my head. And he said, it doesn't matter that I found out that the person that I hit died. And he just cried. And it turns out that this was his 6th offense. And I thought, yes, it's tragic that he hit somebody and died, but here's this man. Like, how did he get to a 6th offense? How did he get there? Like this? There has got to be something that we can do because now he's the guy society hates.
Sure.
So anyway, yeah, that's my story about my why. And so eventually I still, when I moved my practice, when I finished grad school, got licensed, moved my practice to Front Royal. And then when the RSW regional jail was established, I actually went in and did wellness classes for the inmates for like a year and a half and talked about like all the stuff I talk about on my podcast. It was super cool. Like before I even had the podcast, because they're people and they need to talk about this stuff too, So anyway, that's my own little corner of the world trying to change something. But I discovered for myself that policy is not the way to do it. But for you, it sounds like a huge season and a huge of your life and a huge passion. So, can you tell us about some of the wins that you said you had, some of the highs that you had, and then can you tell us why you got out of it?
Sure. And I mean, honestly, it was an interesting time because I was very young, in my 20s. Through my 20s is really when I was there. And I realized very quickly that most of your government is run by people in their 20s.
Uh-huh.
And
fascinating.
Which is a little strange. For the bulk of my career, I handled appropriations.
Okay.
So this was back when the federal budget still allowed for direct appropriations.
Okay.
What we called earmarks.
Mm-hmm.
And working for a senator, my job was to meet with municipalities and businesses and universities, people who were seeking direct federal funds for whatever project they had.
Okay.
And it could be everything from dredging in a local community, a coastal community, to creating a different defense weapon system, all of the appropriations bills I handled.
Right.
And as a 25-year-old, I'm interviewing these people and prioritizing whether or not I thought that their project should receive the federal funds. Our office was basically said for each bill, you get so many millions of dollars to allocate. And it was my job to decide if you got it or not. So I was the gatekeeper to say,
wow.
yes, you can have these millions of dollars. And it was such a strange
wow.
thing to have these people come to me, and I'm so young.
Yeah.
And to have the senator trust me to say, yeah, okay. Now, if he had a strong preference about something, then of course he would exercise it. But for the most part, there was no way that he could sift through every application and figure out what should be a priority or not for our state to receive money. And a lot went into that, but to be given in your mid-20s hundreds of millions of dollars to be
such authority
for,
and
I think that people don't realize that sort of thing even happens,
right.
But at the same time, a lot of people burn out because of the hours and just a lot of ways that you live your life. I mean, a lot of people live from like dinner to dinner. There's like different events being thrown. And it was a fun, exciting lifestyle. I mean, I met so many celebrities and got to hear about really cool projects. And I got to travel to the state that we represented often and see all these cool demonstrations of cutting edge research. There was this one man who was figuring out how to remove the allergen from peanuts. I mean,
wow,
like really cool things.
Yeah.
And to have somebody find value in sharing what they're doing with me consistently. I mean, it was such a cool experience.
Just like in the loop, in the loop at such a critical level. And you know what I love though, about the fact that you're saying that, the country is run by people in their 20s. What I love about that is those people, they're not jaded. They're fresh thinkers. They're limitless thinkers. They're thinkers who push the envelope. And like you said, many burn out, but I don't mind that. I love that people in their 20s are running things.
And there are people from all ages, but at a certain point, I think, because your pay scale is not super high in public service, people jump ship to do other things. For lobbying or more profitable things, but also with the time spent, for me at least, it came down to when I had kids, that the amount of time plus the commute didn't make sense for me to be able to raise my daughter at the time. I would really have never seen her. There wasn't a daycare that was open long enough to be there. So I ended up leaving, and it was the right decision at the time. I do miss a lot of it. But what I really missed most was the first senator I worked for had this mentality that was so contagious. I just wanted to be around him. I just wanted to be in his space all of the time. And he taught me so many lessons about how to treat people and how to be open-minded. How he dealt with people from the other party and how many people respected him because he wouldn't go into a debate saying, I've already made up my mind. It was, tell me what you have to say about this, because if there's information I don't have, then I need to know. And
that's, what that translates into our daily lives. As people, as women, we are very, very comfortable with knowing what we know and believing what we believe. And I think that keeps us, that lie kind of, that, we've made up our minds. We know what's right. We know what's true. It keeps us from those powerful connections of, I forget how you said it earlier but surrounding ourselves with the people in our bubble that can challenge us, that can lift us up, that can make us greater. And those are the people who don't think like us. They're
Right.
people who think differently. Yeah. So great. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think the biggest lesson that I took away that I still apply to my life now, I was always told that just because you've done something one way in the past, that's not a good rationale for continuing to do
That's
it
right.
that way in the future.
That's right.
And so it was, if we're going to do this again, give me a reason that's what we did last year.
Yeah. Tradition does not forge a sure path.
Sure. Yeah. And so I feel like I ended up becoming a better parent.
Yeah.
From these lessons that then I'm trying to instill into my children.
Okay.
About how to be willing to, speak to everybody and
be curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciated the time that I had.
That's great. So you left and it was the decision for you at the time to be able to raise your daughter. And how many kids do you have now?
I have two.
Two. Okay. How old are they?
7 and 4.
Oh, so it's not been too long that you've been out of this. So what's been going on in the meantime?
So when I left the Hill, I actually went full time in my Mary Kay business because I had already had that on the side, and it was an opportunity for me to still be an achiever.
Uh-huh.
That was important to me, that I could be a work from home mom.
Sure.
I am super impressed by stay at home moms, and
I am too.
I cannot be one of them.
No.
I've realized very quickly that if I did not have an identity based on myself and not based on who I was in relation to other people, that I would drown in, like, I probably would have been depressed if I had to solely be Kennedy's mom or that wasn't my personality.
Yeah. But you know what, Katie? I think you hit on something really powerful there, because there are so many women who are desperate. I mean, they love their kids. You love your kid. It's not about love. It's not about how much you love your kids. But the truth is that being a mom is a role that you play. It's not who you are. It's not your identity. Right. It is a role that you play. And I think there are so many moms that are desperate for the permission to have an identity other than being somebody's mom. Even if they still choose to be a stay-at-home mom, your identity is not as a mom. That's what you do, but it's not who you are. Yeah.
And you can find your identity in so many things. It was just growing up already having the mindset of, I need achievement and outside recognition.
Sure.
That's what I craved.
Okay.
Growing up. I mean, I was valedictorian in my college just because I was trying to figure out a way to get on that, like, the stage,
I love your determination.
But I ended up being number 4 overall. Disclaimer.
Oh, okay.
In my college, but 4 overall. So I still didn't make it based on that. But I was a student speaker, so see, I still made it. I was like, okay, I'm getting there. But that's why I chose to have my identity locked into my career at the time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because now, being in my mid-30s, what I realized is that I had sort of set myself up to fail early on, in that because I was so focused on achieving and taking the next step, that I didn't necessarily take the time to figure out what I really wanted for myself.
Okay.
That I was willing to sort of check a box and skip ahead.
Okay. So that the drive for the achievement was your identity, but maybe you started discovering that that wasn't all fulfilling. Is that what you're saying?
Well, in that, in order to get the fulfillment of achievement,
Mm-hmm.
I would sort of take shortcuts to get there.
Oh, understood.
And I did a lot of it through personal relationships. So um,
Got
I
it.
alluded that I had at 21, I had a very, very powerful resume. Um,
I bet.
and because at that point, I had my internships, I worked for a member of the House, I worked for a congressional subcommittee, I worked for the White House, I worked for a member of Parliament, I worked for a senator, or I was working for a senator. I had graduated, I had 2 degrees, I had 3 minors, like I was in every
Wow.
club. It was my thing. I was so excited. And
Sure.
I was like, okay, let's move to the next thing. Because in college, I had this ability to have a lot of wins quickly.
Okay.
You change classes every 6 months or
Yeah.
however many
Right.
months. You know, you go through things quickly.
Right.
And that need to progress at
Mm-hmm.
that, quite frankly, unrealistic rate
Yeah. Uh-huh.
was what drove me. And so
Mm.
if I
And so
did,
it's almost like a high that you could never,
yeah.
after that, you could not reach again.
And so if I didn't have something major each year, I felt like a failure. Like
Wow.
like at age 25, I cried at my birthday.
Oh my
Like
goodness.
I was like, how could I be this far? And it was funny because, so, I graduated at 21. 22, I bought a house. At
Wow.
23, I was engaged. 24, I was married. At 25, I had a master's degree and I cried. I was like,
Because you weren't achieving at that rate as
yeah,
you were before.
I was
Wow.
like, how can I be so far behind?
Oh my goodness. What a
Which is
lie.
which is so ridiculous, right?
It's such a lie, but so many of us believe it.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, that's what I was doing to myself.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, by the time 30 rolled around, I was totally fine. But
Okay.
I was like, okay, whatever. Remember, um, but then in the last 5 years, I went through a divorce, and
Okay.
it was this totally the right decision. But what I realized is that because I was so focused on all of these boxes to check,
Uh-huh.
that I hadn't really considered what I truly wanted and where I was trying
Right.
to go.
Right.
And so I sort of was making choices based on what would look the best to other people.
Okay.
And
Wow. But that
uh,
external recognition that you were talking
mhm,
about. Uh-huh.
yeah, because our marriage was such a good story. We had known each other since I was 9,
Mm.
and um,
Oh, wow.
the Washington Post did 2 stories on our marriage. Like it was so much for outward appearances.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not to say that I wasn't ever happy, but I came to realize that I was staying
Mm-hmm.
because of how it looked
Oh.
and not because of how I felt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was being very inauthentic.
Mm.
And,
How did you have that discovery, Katie?
you know, somebody actually asked me one day if I was happy.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not unhappy.
Wow.
And they're like, that's not the same thing.
Uh-uh.
But to me, it was the same thing because it gave me the ability to stay on track.
Yeah.
And so it was a conscious choice to stay in my marriage because of this was like the boxes had already been checked. I can't go back now.
Okay. Okay.
But when you're not happy,
Yeah.
right, then a lot of things bother you.
Yeah.
And things build up over time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
so I realized that because of my need to put on this perfect persona to the
Mm-hmm.
world, I also wasn't sharing what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, except for, a few people who were very close to me,
Mm-hmm.
who had sort of seen fights and, that sort of thing, for the most part, it came as a total shock to everybody that I was going to get divorced.
Mm. Because
Family,
nobody knew what was happening in your internal world.
like my family had no idea, you know. It
Wow.
it was it was so dramatic that my family thought I was having a midlife crisis.
Mm. Wow.
And I went to a counselor
Mm-hmm.
to basically figure out what's going on
Yeah.
and all of that. And she said to me, "You're not having a midlife crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You've just realized that you're being inauthentic,
Mm-hmm.
that you've continued to do so, and you're unwilling to continue in that
That's
path."
right. That's right.
And so, yeah, it's a shock because I wasn't open about
Right.
it. And she's like, "But at the same time, how long do you want to keep this going?
Yeah.
If you know in your heart that it's not right,
Mm-hmm.
then at some point you're gonna call it quits."
Yeah. Right.
And she was like, "So how long do you want to keep going through this before, before you really can
Right.
move on and try and be happy?" And what made me realize that it was for sure time is that one of my best friends, her parents had just gotten divorced, when she was an adult. So they
Okay.
had waited until their kids were adults
Right.
and then said, "Okay, just kidding. Like, we're getting divorced.
Right.
It's been a long time coming. We've just been waiting for you to be an adult."
There are so many people that do that.
Yeah. And my children are young, as I said. And I was just like, I don't want my daughter to have to grow up thinking that she should put her happiness on hold because of how it might impact other people.
Well, and how it might look. Let me ask you a question, Katie. So you have this really, it's not a midlife crisis. It's a crisis of conscience, of identity, of coming face to face with who you are, and then having to live that out in your life.
Yeah.
And so going from a long history, basically a fabric of your being of checking off the boxes for that external recognition. And then you go and you start this process of, divorce and whatever. And it comes as a shock to everybody. And then you're not getting external recognition. You're getting external criticism.
Yeah.
So what was that shift like for you?
Well, I initially had the external criticism from really people who should have been closest to me, with family and some close friends. And because of it, I hid what was happening from others.
Yeah.
So the closest people knew what was happening. And then, the people who were more acquaintances, I didn't share.
Yeah.
And finally, one day, I just sort of broke down and I couldn't keep hiding what was happening, especially because I do run these two women's groups. I'm in front of, 100 women over the course of the month, every month.
And you wanted to be authentic.
And, and people can tell when something's going on.
Yeah.
And I remember saying in front of not everybody, but like a handful of people, "This is what's happening to me right now." And I was almost embarrassed, not knowing how that would go.
Yeah.
But by the end of the day, two people came up to me who we weren't really close by any means. And they're like, oh my God, I am going through something similar. Can we
Mm.
talk about this?
Wow.
And
Mm.
every time I shared, more people opened up.
Yes. Yes.
And it was sort of this whole awakening to realize that because I wasn't being authentic before,
Mm-hmm.
people didn't feel like they could connect to me
Mm-hmm.
because people cannot connect to perfection. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist and they recognize that it's fake.
But
So
yet,
they might not
well,
know
we
what
all
it
strive
is.
for it. We
Right.
strive for it because I bet you, I guarantee you, Katie, there were people looking at you like, man, she has got it all together. What is wrong with me? But your story and your experience, not just your story, but your life and your experience and what you're sharing is the prime example that none of us, none of us have it together, quote unquote.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just people really identified with what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it made me feel more connected. And I actually developed stronger, deeper relationships with people than I really had in the past. I mean,
Wow.
the people that I had said were my very best friends, I realized I had very surface level relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
We just happened to have had them for a very long time,
Yeah.
a very
Yeah.
long time. And so it really made me recognize that a lot of the way I was living was that surface level
Yeah.
experience. And so now I feel like being true to who you are
Mm-hmm.
unapologetically, I mean, you don't have to be in people's faces about it, but
Right.
to basically say, this is how I'm going to live my life because I know it's right for me.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to be concerned about whether or not you approve of
Right.
it
Right.
because I've already determined that this is what's best for me and for my
Right.
children.
Right.
It's very freeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love, there's so many truths that you just shared in that, but the one that struck me is that when you are as a woman in particular, because so many of us strive for this unachievable, unrealistic perfection that just doesn't exist on many different levels, physical, family, relationship, parenting, professional, whatever. But that when we have those experiences, when we have encounters with ourselves, and we have this crisis of conscience, so to speak, and when we start to share that, it breeds not just authenticity in ourselves, but authenticity in other people. Like you said, people come up to you and go, me too. Thank you so much for saying that. It just opens the door for people to stop hiding.
Right.
Yeah. So
It gives you
thank you.
permission to be real.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you doing these days, Katie? What's on the horizon for you?
So many things.
So many things.
Yeah. I found the love of my life. Very happy
Wow.
about it. And it's refreshing to be able to say that I'm happy and not
Not unhappy. Right.
Yeah. Um, and I'm trying to get back into public service and
Okay.
really it's been kind of a whirlwind the last couple years kind of going through all of this, but I feel a lot more at peace
Yeah.
with it. And I think that ultimately I can serve as a better leader
Yeah, for
having
sure.
been through it.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. So you are the master of connection, not just because you're being vulnerable with people, but because that's been in your heart to have the legacy and the impact, particularly with women. So how can the women listening connect with you? How do you want them to connect with you?
Well, they can connect with me personally. I'm on Facebook or Instagram.
Okay.
And Katie Landi Jordan.
Okay.
Jordan is a common last name.
Yeah.
And on Instagram, I'm KLandJ.
Okay.
I thought it sounded kind of like a rapper's name, even though I'm the most preppy non-rapper there is. But also, I think that all women need a community of others to uplift them. And I love Polka Dot Powerhouse. And it is an international women's organization. So you can go to polkadotpowerhouse.com and find a chapter near you. There's also an international community through there for people who don't have a chapter locally to them that they can still connect.
So even abroad, because we do have listeners abroad. So,
great. They do have members from all over the world who may not have a chapter near them yet.
Great. Perfect. Yes, friends, reach out to Katie. Isn't she wonderful? You are wonderful. Thank you for sharing your heart with us. Yeah. And so, hey, leave us with one more thing. If you don't mind, I ask every guest to leave the women listening with one truth that you want them to remember when this show ends today.
I think that what's most important in life is that you're true to who you know you are without worry that you will be judged for it. They say that life is short, but it's actually kind of long. You gotta go through it for a long time, and it can feel really lonely if you're not being true to who you are.
Yes. Love it. Thank you. Hey, friends, wasn't Katie fantastic? Oh my goodness. I just love her heart. I love her vulnerability and honesty and bravery. Hey, listen, y'all, this is why I started this podcast, so that we as women can have honest and frank conversations with ourselves between one another to encourage one another that you're not alone. I love what Katie said. People don't connect with perfection. Y'all, sisters, none of us have it together. None of us are perfect. None of us will ever achieve all of the things that we want to achieve. None of us, even if we check off all the boxes like Katie did, will be exceedingly happy. That's just not how it works. It really is all about discovering you, being your authentic self, and in the process, giving other women permission to do the same. So take it from Katie Jordan, our preppy non-rapper friend. So take it from Katie Jordan, our preppy non-rapper friend. All women need community. That includes me and you, sisters. Hey, listen, thanks for tuning in today. If you are an Apple Podcast user, will you please hit the subscribe button and scroll to the section where it says rating and reviews, and just click 5 stars for me, why don't you, if this message has impacted you today, and share it with a friend. Thanks for tuning in, and remember as you go about your week to speak truth over the lies in your mind so that you can thrive in any and every circumstance.